Welcome to the Salem Baptist Church podcast.
So tonight, whenever we took the survey back in September, beginning of September, maybe last year, nobody picked gambling. But you're going to wish you did after tonight, because I think that this is an incredibly relevant topic for us as believers, for us as a church, and for our culture. So I'm looking forward to tackling that with you. Before we get started, though, I want to remind you of a couple of ground rules. Number one, we are recording this. We will place it online. If for any reason you missed any of these, you are able to go back and listen to those, whether on Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube. But in light of that, of course, if you have a question or comment throughout the study, please feel free to lift up a hand. I've got a microphone. I'll come to you. Just know that that question, that comment will be included on the podcast that we place online. However, if you would like to save it to the end, we cut off the end part so that that question answer discussion time does stay in the room and is not put out there, and so you can save it to the end. So that's how it will work this evening. So with all that said, let's talk about gambling. And I want to begin tonight with a brief history of gambling in the United States. As some of us maybe come into the room tonight and we think of gambling, we think what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? We think, well, that's something that happens in Las Vegas, or maybe Atlantic City in New Jersey, maybe a few other places. You know, we know that there's some Native American casinos, but maybe we're not really sure what goes on or how we got to where we are today. So here is a very brief history of gambling. 1612, King James I of England created a lottery to provide funds for the Jamestown settlement. Remember Jamestown? Right there in Virginia. It was the very first permanent British settlement in the New World, and they held a little lottery to help support it. Lotteries were actually held throughout the colonies to finance the building of towns, roads, hospitals, and schools, even though many colonists disapproved for moral reasons. Let's fast forward. In the 1800s, gambling was generally tolerated as long as it did not upset the social order. In 1823, Louisiana legalized gambling and actually licensed gambling halls in New Orleans. Though it was repealed, the licensing was repealed in 1835, casino-type gambling prospered and spread to the riverboats on the Mississippi River. Think about riverboat gambling. Under President Andrew Jackson, gambling scandals and moral objections to gambling led to the end of most legalized gambling by the mid-1800s. But it was after this time, once you got out of civilized territory to the frontier, that the era of frontier gambling reached its peak. Of course, we've all seen, maybe all of us, many of us have seen the Western movies. You know, you go to the Old West, and of course there's saloon, and what are they doing in the saloon? They're gambling, they're playing cards, and then of course somebody cheats and somebody gets shot. You know, you've seen the scenes. So that all happened in the latter part of the 1800s. So let's fast forward a little bit. By the end of the century, so by the end of the 19th century, the end of the 1800s, most gambling was shut down. By the end of the century, all state lotteries were shut down by federal law. Even in 1910, Nevada outlawed casino gambling. New York outlawed horse racing, and almost all gambling in the U.S. was prohibited. So you go back 115 years, and there was almost no legalized gambling in the United States, even in Nevada. What changed? Well, the Great Depression, for starters. So get to the 1930s, and all of that starts to unravel. First of all, you get into the 1930s, many states legalized horse racing and charitable gambling. Nevada made casino gambling legal in 1931. They were suffering from the Depression and they needed all the revenue that they could get. They also came up with another novel way to raise revenue in Nevada. They started allowing divorces after only 6 weeks if you were a resident in the state. So you could move to Nevada, stay there for 6 weeks, and you could get a divorce, which in that time was like instantaneous. And so people were constantly traveling to Nevada, staying in the inns and motels 6 weeks to achieve residency, and then getting their divorces. Some of this obviously starts to play into the culture of Las Vegas that will come into being. The first big casino, El Rancho Vegas, opened in 1941 on what would later become known as the Las Vegas Strip. After World War II, people flocked to Vegas, and the growing casinos provided good-paying jobs. In 1964, New Hampshire was the very first state to make the lottery legal again. So 1964, you get your first statewide lottery, or first legalized lotteries. New York followed, and during the 1970s, 12 other states joined in the lottery game. In 1978, the first legal casino opened in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And by the mid-1990s, 9 more states had legalized casino gambling, and 23 more legalized lotteries. North Carolina legalized the lottery in 2006. I actually remember that. I was a North Carolina resident. They said we're going to have the North Carolina Education Lottery, which I think they put that education word in there to make you feel better about it. In the mid-1990s, we get the invention of something wholly new. Internet gambling comes into being. And by the end of the 1990s, there were 700 gambling sites online. It generated $21 billion by 2008. And in 2008, a Gallup poll showed that 63% of Americans said gambling was morally acceptable, and only 32% said that it was wrong. And then the game changer. In 2018, the Supreme Court overturned a law banning legal sports betting, and today, sports betting is legal in some form in 39 states and in Washington, D.C. And of course, we all probably remember when it was legalized in North Carolina. And then all of the advertisements on your sports suddenly became all about legalized sports betting, whether it was FanDuel or DraftKings or ESPN Bet or whatever else. Fill in the blank. It's all there. So that's a little bit of the history. As you can see, America has had a love-hate relationship with gambling. There have been times when we allowed it. There have been times when we have outlawed it. We've had lotteries. We've had casinos. We've had sports betting, going all the way back to horse racing and cockfighting. And the pendulum has swung in both directions. Right now, it is swinging towards favorability, but not without some moral objections. So, let me share some stories with you that kind of paint a picture of where we are, specifically in the area of sports betting, but it flows into other areas of gambling as well. Let's start off with the story of the athlete. The Purdue men's basketball team was a favorite to win the 2024 men's basketball national championships. I remember March Madness that year. Walk-on guard Carson Barrett suffered a serious knee injury earlier in the season, but he postponed surgery so that he could practice with the team, even though it was painful, and cheer his teammates on from the bench. In their first game of March Madness, the Purdue Boilermakers cruised to victory. They were completely destroying the other team. So with a short time left in the closing minutes, both teams emptied out their benches, right? We're not going to get a chance to win this game, and so we're going to put in all of our reserve players, and same for Purdue, so that they get time to play in the March Madness tournament when there's nothing really at stake. So it's in that moment that Carson Barrett steps out onto the court. As soon as he gets out there, the ball swung to Barrett with 35 seconds left on the clock, and Purdue was up 75-50, right? So not much at stake. With a brace on his knee, the lefty caught and fired and swished a three-pointer for the game's final basket. Just the second shot that he had made all season. His teammates were overjoyed. It was a celebration. You made a shot in March Madness. However, back in the locker room, as Barrett thumbed through his direct messages on social media, his night took a dark turn. Here is a sampling of the messages that this young guard received. And I'm not going to say the words. However, I'll let you use your imagination. You sure are a son of a blank. Hope you enjoy selling cars for the rest of your life. I hope you blank die. Kill yourself for taking that three, you blank worthless loser. And on and on and on. Death threats, nasty messages, all to this kid who just came out in the final seconds and made a three-point. Why? All this rage was coming from gamblers, furious that his three-point shot allowed Purdue to cover the spread. Now, how many of y'all know what the spread is? Okay, two or three, four. Okay, a few of you know. Those little numbers that you see now all the time when you watch sports. When you look at a game and you got two teams matching up and you say, it's going to be a boring game. I'll pick on my own right here, Cleveland Browns. If you see the Cleveland Browns are going up this season against the New England Patriots, you're like, we know who's going to win. But that's where the spread comes in. How much are they going to win by? Are they going to win by 20? Are they going to win by 15? That is the spread. And so it makes uninteresting games interesting to gamblers because you can bet against the spread. Basically, if the team covers the spread, so in other words, in the case of the Patriots, if the Patriots were favored to beat the Browns by 20 points, if the Patriots score less than 20, you can win, right? They didn't beat them as bad as you thought. If they score more than 20, right, then you lose, right? The Patriots beat the spread. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense. I can explain it in more detail later. But basically, it's a way to make boring games interesting by giving one team a handicap, in a sense. You know, maybe help some of you golfers figure this out. And so what they do is in a game like this first game in March Madness, where you got a 1 seed versus a 16 seed, nobody's going to bet on the 16 seed. But what you do is you say, well, what's the spread? Okay, and the problem is when this young guard hit his basket, Purdue covered the spread. They were supposed to win by X number of points, and they did. And so people who bet that they weren't going to cover the spread, because this kid made his basket, all of a sudden lost a boatload of money. And so this guy receives a bunch of nasty messages. Barrett's last-minute basket caused Purdue to cover the spread by a single point, while those who took the other team suffered an agonizing defeat. Now, this happens all the time. College kids, pro athletes now get all kinds of messages, death threats. They get bribe offers. Hey, I'll give you $200 if you do X. This is just par for the course nowadays. But let's shift it now. We've heard a story about an athlete. Let's talk about an addict. Brian is a 27-year, not me, okay, just clarify that. Brian is a 27-year-old network engineer from Queens, New York, who would bet a few grand every week. A little poker, maybe the casinos. Usually it was the NBA or Major League Baseball when it came to sports. He'd win, he'd lose. The most he ever owed was $30,000 to a loan shark with ties to a Chinese crime syndicate. He says he definitely wasn't somebody you wanted to owe money to. But then online sports betting came along. A few weeks ago, Brian says, I was out with friends at a restaurant, and while they were telling stories, I was staring at my lap and betting on my phone. I was $300,000 in debt not too long ago. He says, I was up $200,000 just last month, but lost it all, and now I'm over $100,000 in debt again. Gambling has cost Brian not only a great deal of money, but his girlfriend. She moved out after he gambled away their rent money one time too many, and his parents, who no longer talk to him. And he said it's led him to dabble in various illegal side hustles to subsidize his now legal obsession. But in addition to the athletes and the addicts, there's also the adjacent, the people who are attached to those who are involved in gambling. Sharon, 32 years old, lives in Denver. She said her marriage is on the brink of collapse and that the family, including 2 small kids, is on the verge of becoming homeless, all because her husband can't quit sports betting. She says it goes in spurts. He'll go for 2 weeks on a gambling binge, lose $15,000, and stop because he feels guilty. He'll build his money back up, and then the process starts all over again. He has slowly depleted literally everything we have. He always chooses to do it at the worst possible times, like after the birth of our son, or Christmas, or most recently, after I got in a horrible car wreck and couldn't work. She added, I honestly don't know what to do. I can't stop him. He gets so angry and defensive when I bring it up. So I could go on and on. There's story after story, and I've tried to stay informed on it. But, it's kind of why, as I see, I watch a lot of sports. Those of you who know me know I enjoy it. And every time there's always advertisements about sports betting and all kinds of celebrities getting in on the action. And it always makes me feel just a little bit queasy. Because as we have read here, there are vulnerable people out there, whether it's the folks playing in the sports. And I won't even go into all the scandals that have already emerged in the sports world. I could do a whole segment just on that and on the folks who have already gotten in trouble for cheating, fixing games because of sports betting who are playing. Forget Pete Rose. We've gone far beyond that. But it is increasingly present in our culture. You see it everywhere, but it's important we know what the effects of it are. Let me give you some statistics here this evening. 39 states plus Washington, D.C. have legalized sports betting. That number is only anticipated to go up. 1/4 of sports bettors say they've been unable to pay a bill because of a wager. 1/3 of sports bettors say they have debts attributed to gambling. 1/4 of sports bettors worry they can't control their gambling. 21%, 1 out of 5 sports bettors say they verbally abused an athlete in person or online after losing money. Right? So Carson's story, not uncommon. The American Gaming Association estimates people wagered $150 billion on sports in 2024. That's huge. That's a massive sum of money. 7 states have legalized real money online casinos. Right? So in 7 different states, you don't have to physically go to a casino. You can go to one online legally. 24 states have legalized commercial casinos, and they brought in $50 billion in 2023. Only Nevada and Louisiana allow them anywhere in the state, but that many different states allow casinos somewhere. Right? It used to just be Nevada, but now it's expanded. I remember when I was in Georgia, it was a huge debate over whether or not they were going to legalize sports betting, and my state legislature friend was strongly against it, and they managed to keep it off. I'm not sure what the status is there now. There are only 5 states that do not sell lottery tickets. Just 5. Alabama, Alaska, Hawaii, Utah, go get them, Mormons, and Nevada, ironically enough. Americans spent $103 billion on state lottery tickets in 2023. Yeah, that's why the states do it. The National Survey on Gambling Attitudes and Behaviors showed that nearly 20 million Americans experienced at least one problematic gambling behavior many times in the past year. So that's 20 million Americans who have had some kind of problematic gambling behavior in the past year. That's not even counting those who play and have not reported a problematic gambling behavior. So if you think this is something happening somewhere else, right? Okay, like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and there are people who go there and they do that thing. No. It is happening probably in this room. It's certainly happening in the NPR with the people who are not, hopefully during the sermon in the NPR. Though you never know, right? Sunday is football day. But there are folks in there who are engaged in it. And so it's everywhere. It's family members, it's friends, it's coworkers, it's classmates, it's everywhere. And so what we need to do is look at it from a Christian perspective. How should we think about it? Right? There are some Christians who just go, well, I vaguely heard that it was bad, and so I'm against it. And there are others who just don't know what to think about it. And some that say, well, I don't see really any issue in it. If I do a word search on my Bible app, gambling doesn't really come up. So what should I think about it? Well, let's look at some scriptures. And I know I've got the reference on one of these wrong. It really does bless my heart to know that y'all are checking my references, though. So thank you, actually. So I'm going to blame it on the weather. I'm just out of sorts this week. But I'll tell you what those are when we get to them. First of all, the ones that I definitely I'm pretty sure I've got right here. We're going to look at 3 passages in Proverbs. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at several passages from Proverbs as well as some from the New Testament Gospels. I don't have time to look at every passage about money. The goal here is not to construct a theology of wealth and how we spend our money, but look at some passages that give us an idea that even though the Bible may not use the word gambling in the way that we think of it or describe modern day gambling, it does have some principles and some guardrails and some warnings that we can apply to this. So let's take a look at that. Proverbs 13:11. Let me see a hand for Proverbs 13:11. Who would like to take that one on for me? All right, I see you, Brad, back there. Proverbs 16:20. I see you, Phil. Thank you. And then Proverbs 21:20. Proverbs 21:20. Going once, going twice. Sold to June, right there. Okay, I'm coming back to Proverbs 13:11. And Brad? Yes, I got it from you, Scott. Yeah, I did check on that. Thank you so much.
Proverbs 13:11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it.
Wealth gathered hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers it little by little, they're going to increase it and they're going to maintain it. Proverbs, I don't have time to do a deep dive on Proverbs here. Proverbs is wisdom literature. It's not handing down hard and fast rules as much as it is describing this is the way the world works. And if you lean into that, you will experience more blessing and flourishing if you do not. Right? So Proverbs will say things like, the righteous will be blessed and the wicked will perish. But we know, of course, that's not always the case. These are just, it describes the moral ordering that God has placed in the universe, and that if we lean into that, in general, we will experience more blessing than not. And here what we have is a principle expressed in the Proverbs that says, when you acquire wealth little by little, in other words, by hard work and effort, you will come to value it and care it for it, and it will sustain you longer. But wealth you get quickly tends to go away, right? We think of famous pop stars who immediately went to the top of the charts, spent all their money, never had another hit. Next thing you know, they're living in a van down by the river. Okay, we have seen this story, lottery winners who had lots of money and then they had none, right? There is something about the slow accumulation of wealth with effort that makes it last versus I got it in a day and I'll lose it in a day. And gambling wins are just like that. I mean, you heard that in Brian's story, right? I'm up 200,000. Now I'm down 100,000, right? It's that idea that I got it quickly. If I lose it, I can get it quickly again, but it doesn't always work that way. Let's take a look at Proverbs 16:20. Phil, I think you had that one.
Yes, sir. He who gives attention to the word will find good, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord.
Is that Proverbs 16:20?
16:20. Is that one of the ones?
I may have a wrong reference on that one too. 16:33 is the one I was going for, Phil. 16:33. I'll let you read that one. You're right there.
The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord.
The lot is cast into the lap. You think of lots when it's in the Bible, you could think like dice, right, in that sense. I'm casting a lot. But when the scripture describes casting lots, right, whether it's Jonah with the sailors on the boat, or whether it's the priest in Leviticus with the Urim and the Thummim, or whether it is the scripture here in Proverbs, it's not really talking about games of chance, right? It's the recognition that our sovereign God controls even the smallest details. It's all under his purview. There's no real random chance, but it's done in such a way that we are trusting to the Lord's sovereign direction. It is not used in the sense of a game of chance, a roll of the dice. Maybe it goes my way, maybe it doesn't. And so it is ultimately expressed as a trust in his sovereignty, not an invitation to play the game of chance, and if the Lord loves me, he's going to let me win a whole bunch of money. But it's something to remember as we think about games of chance, that ultimately we want to put our trust in the sovereign Lord, not in the roll of a dice, because he's the one who ultimately rules over all of it. All right, next verse was June. Okay. I think I got this one right.
Proverbs 21:20, there is a precious treasure in oil in the home of the wise, but a foolish person swallows it up.
Okay. Basically, what Proverbs 21:20 tells us is that the wise person stores up treasure, preserves treasure, maintains it, but the foolish person gets rid of it quickly. The person who is wise holds on to what they have. The person who is foolish spends it all, uses it up. Now, let me look to the next verse. Scott, I'm going to let you get this one. Proverbs 28:19 through 20. You're good.
The one who works his land will have plenty of food, but whoever chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty. The faithful man will have many blessings, but one in a hurry to get rich will not go unpunished.
All right, two good points in there. First of all, the one who works his land, it goes well. The one who chases fantasies will go hungry. What is gambling a lot of times? We're chasing that fantasy of wealth. We're chasing that fantasy of victory. We're chasing that fantasy of coming on top versus diligently working the land. We are to be faithful, the scripture says, with what we have, rather than seeking to get rich quick, right? They will not go unpunished. A lot of those get-rich schemes, whether it is, going on to FanDuel, right, or whatever it might be, ultimately blow up in your face many times. And so it is diligence and persistence and hard work that Proverbs commends to us, not chasing fantasies, not get-rich-quick schemes or pyramid schemes or whatever they might be. Now let's switch gears a little bit, head over to the New Testament. Matthew 6:24. Matthew 6:24. Who wants to take that one for me? Wendy? Matthew 6:24, and then I need Matthew 25:20 through 21 and 27. Matthew 25:20 through 21 and 27. Anybody want that one? All right, thank you, Billy. All right, go ahead and read for me Matthew 6:24.
Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money.
You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. No one can serve two masters. So if gambling is your master, if money is your master, that's what you're living for, you're unable to serve God. Either gambling and the money you can acquire through it will rule your life, or God will rule your life. But no one can serve two masters, right? If you're going to dinner with friends and you're checking your phone under the table to place bets, there's a good bet that God is not the ruler of your life, but money is. This can apply to a lot of different things, but it certainly applies to the case of gambling. And then Billy, Matthew 25:20 through 21, if you want to read that one first, and then we'll go to 27.
The servant to whom he entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.
All right, and then read for me verse 27.
Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it.
So this is the famous parable of the talents, where the master's going away and he entrusts his servants, one with 5 talents, one with 2 talents, one with 1 talent. What do they go out and do? They're to go out and multiply it. They're to invest it. They're to put it to work to make more. And a couple things from this, 2 things that really stand out to me. First of all, we are to be good stewards of all that God gives us. Every resource he places in our hands, we are to treat it as a gift from God, something that he has entrusted to our care to be used wisely. That's why the servant there in the parable of the talents was commended. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with much. With little, I will put you over much, right? Come and enter into the joy of your master. Right? We want to be faithful with what God entrusts us with, whether that's relationships or time or money or talents or skills, whatever that might be. And so we want to be good stewards of what God gives us. And when we go and we start betting it and gambling it online, we cease to be good stewards. But the second thing we can note is investing bad. Because some people would say, oh my goodness, isn't the stock market, aren't investments just, gambling for the highly educated or the wealthy? Is that what's going on here? Is your 401k just fancy gambling? Is that what? No. Yes, Bill already knows the answer to that. No. There's a big difference. When we look at things like the stock market, investments, obviously we even see Jesus in this parable saying, hey, you should have at least put my money in the bank. You should have at least invested it there because then I would have at least earned some interest from it. When we invest our money, we're creating value, right? We are giving that resource to someone else so they can use it to create more for humanity, more flourishing, right? I mean, one of the best investments that you could have made in the early 2000s was Domino's Pizza. If you had invested money in Domino's Pizza back in the early 2000s, you'd have made more money than if you had invested in Apple or Amazon or Microsoft. I mean, I'm talking, their stock went through the roof. When you gave money to Domino's, are you taking a risk? To a degree, yes, but you're also creating value because today I enjoy Domino's Pizza. It wouldn't have been there if people had not invested in Domino's. There's a difference between putting your money to work to create value and then earning a return versus gambling it away in something that creates no value except for the owners of FanDuel or ESPN Bet. Right? It's money that is just being thrown into the ether, being thrown into the pockets of casino owners, etc. It's a very different thing. Now, we have to be good stewards of our investments, don't we? Right? So some of us, we might not be able to risk as much, and so we want to make safe, wise investments. Others of us, we may have more flexibility and freedom, and so we can make a little bit riskier investments. We need people to make risky investments. Because sometimes those risky investments really pay off for the good of humanity. But not all of us may be in a position to do that. And that's where wisdom and good stewardship comes in. And so there is a big difference. The Bible commends wise investing. It does not commend foolish gambling. And so there is a distinction made there. We've got to be good stewards of what God has entrusted to us. And then 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10. This will be one that some of you find familiar as well.
1 Timothy 6, 9 and 10. But people who love to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many arrows.
And there's the classic warning from Paul to be aware of the love of money, to be aware of beware of the desire to be rich. Oftentimes that's what plunges people into unhealthy gambling, is that they desire to be rich. They want to make that money, but of course it leads to ruin. It's a way to get pierced with many pangs, as Paul says. He doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. It's not all evil. All kinds of evil. And so we have to make sure we have a healthy relationship with money beyond simply gambling, but gambling can be a sign of an unhealthy relationship where you desire to have more of it, but you don't want to get it the way the proverb says. By work and labor and slowly over time, you want it now. And that is a dangerous temptation that can lead to all kinds of evil, as Paul describes in 1 Timothy. So these are some scriptures that can give us some of an idea of what the Bible thinks about gambling. We also have the church and things that the church has said. We can go back to Clement of Alexandria, one of the early church fathers, who says, the game of dice is to be prohibited in the pursuit of gain, especially by dicing, it's a great word there, which many keenly follow. Such things, the prodigality, oh my goodness, I need to get that word right, of luxury invents for the idle. For the cause is idleness and a love for frivolities apart from the truth. C.S. Lewis, in his book, God in the Dock, says, gambling ought never to be an important part of a man's life. If anyone comes to me asking to play bridge for money, I just say, how much do you hope to win? Take it and go away. I like that. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his Ethics, says, lotteries and bets seek in the future only for the improbable chance, swallowing up almost inconceivable sums of money and often the livelihood of the workman. With the loss of past and future, life fluctuates between the most bestial enjoyment of the moment and an adventurous game of chance. I like the way that Bonhoeffer described it as a loss of past and future, because I think that really captures the danger of gambling. When I gamble, I can lose the past. All the work that I did to acquire that money, all the effort it took can be lost. But not only do I lose the past, I lose the future. Now I can't pay my rent, right? Now I have no money to invest in good pursuits. Now I can't pay the bills. And so in a game of chance, I lose the past and the future. And what does that leave me? That leaves me going back to the game of chance again and again, as Bonhoeffer describes, right? He says, life fluctuates between the most bestial enjoyment of the moment, I win, and an adventurous game of chance. Right? I have to keep going back again and again to try to reclaim what I've lost. And then John MacArthur says, it is an activity in which a person risks something of value to forces of chance completely beyond his control or any rational expectation, in hope of winning something of greater value, usually more money. But it is an appeal by sheer chance. It is the exploitation of the uneducated. It is the exploitation of the undisciplined, the people who lack self-control. It is the exploitation of the lazy people. The sins that support gambling are materialism, greed, discontent, exploitation, laziness, distrust of God's provision, disdain for the virtues of labor, irresponsible stewardship, and indifference to those in need. I just wish sometimes MacArthur would say what he means. So with that as background, let me land the plane here with our response as Christians and some things to keep in mind that can help us. God created us to earn wealth through work. Through work. Genesis 2:15, God creates man and puts him in the garden to work it and to keep it, not to sit idle and gamble it away. And so that has to be the foundation of the way that we pursue wealth. In other words, I think based on the overall testimony of Scripture, pursuing wealth through gambling is wrong. So, pursuing wealth through gambling is wrong, since the Bible's primary way is through work and labor. Number two, the desire to become rich is dangerous. Money is the root of many evils, and that should be 1 Timothy 6:9-10. I got it right on the first page. You better be checking those references next time. Desire to become rich is dangerous. Like if you want money, like that's your desire, like I want to be wealthy, it can lead you down some really dark roads. And that's what Paul is warning Timothy about, right? Once you start to love money, whether you have a lot or a little, it can lead you into some dark places. You could end up like Enron, right? Or in so many other cases, both respectable and disrespectable ways. Number three, we are to be good stewards of what God has entrusted to us. We want to be good stewards of what we have, to make sure we store it up and we use it wisely. Right? If the Lord places resources in our hands, we want to take care of them as His resources ultimately, because it all belongs to Him. Number four, wise investments add value. Games of chance subtract it. Matthew 25, going back to the parable of the talents, we are to wisely invest in ways that add value, right, to humanity, to our brothers and sisters in Christ, not Flitter it away. Fritter it away. I don't know what flitter means. Number 5, we should not be mastered or controlled by anything other than Christ. All right? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Is God the Lord of your money, or is your money the Lord of God? All right? Those are your choices. There's no middle ground there. And so we have to be careful. Not to be master controlled by anything, right? So if you've got a compulsion you can't control, you want to bring that in. Number 6, we are to use our work and use our resources to care for others. 1 Timothy 5:8 makes a really important point. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So if you gamble your money away and you don't have rent money and you can't buy Christmas presents and you can't take care of your wife when she's in a car wreck, right? Like in Sharon's story, then you're in violation of 1 Timothy 5:8. We are to care for our relatives, and we can't do that if we gamble it away. Number 7, we are not to exploit the poor for wealth. Isaiah chapter 3, you can look up that reference later, but it's a warning that God gives to his people about how the rich exploit the poor and those who don't have resources to fill their own pockets. And if it's wrong when a wealthy person does it to a poor person, it can also be wrong when the state does it to a poor person. I've heard it said before that the lottery is a tax on people who can't do math, right? When you look at the odds. But also it's a tax on those who can least afford it. And so we have to be careful there on what we endorse, because it raises, $103 billion? Where's that coming from? It's probably not coming from the wealthy and those who can spare it. Number 8, the Bible doesn't condemn gambling itself as a sin. What does that mean? That means you can search it out. You can look through here. It's not going to say, thou shalt not gamble. You won't find it in here. What the Bible does do is it gives us principles and warnings that enable us to identify much of what is connected to and results from gambling as sin. Right, so I'm not going to tell you here it's wrong to place a bet on a sports game or to put some money in a slot machine and pull the lever. Okay, the Bible doesn't say that, and I've always got to be careful to make that distinction. What I can say is that so many things connected to and resulting from gambling are sinful. And so we have to make sure that we're going back to the scriptures and that it controls how we think about gambling, not our culture. And so obviously we've kind of leaned pretty hard on things the Bible says and cautions and warnings, but we do that with the context. The Bible doesn't address sports betting. The Bible doesn't address casino gambling. What it does do is it gives us principles by which we live our lives and warnings that we need to heed when it comes to gambling. It's a wisdom thing. You know, I think sometimes we as Christians struggle with, we want the Bible to tell us everything in black and white, right? This is right and this is wrong. But a lot of things, the Bible gives us principles and guidelines and warnings, and we have to apply wisdom, right? The Bible doesn't say it's a sin to lick the floor of a public restroom. It doesn't do it. Does that mean you should? Or it's okay? No, you use wisdom to know I'm not licking the floor of a public restroom. And I think gambling's kind of in that core. It's a little bit like licking the floor of a public restroom, right? The Bible may not outright condemn it, but my goodness, when you do it, there's a lot of risk that comes with just like there's licking the floor of I gotta stop referencing that. It's kind of a gross image. But what the Bible does tell me really hems in what I think, and especially how I as a Christian should think about it in terms of what should be legal and allowed, because I also want to love my neighbor. And if I endorse unfettered access to gambling, am I loving my neighbor? All right? Even if those principles and warnings hem my life in, should they not also be of benefit to my neighbor? So those are things that we have to navigate as Christians, even as we think about this, right? Is it sinful to buy a lottery ticket? No. Is it sinful to exploit the poor to fund the state? Yes. Is it sinful to bet on a game? No. Is it sinful to lose resources you and your family depend on? Yes. Is it sinful to gamble? No. Is it sinful to be controlled by gambling? Yes. Is it sinful to go to a casino? No. You can go. Is it sinful to pursue wealth there? Yes. And so this is where, even if the Bible doesn't give us that black and white answer, we can take what the Bible does say and we can apply Christian wisdom to it, and we can know how we should think about and approach this. Ultimately, there's a better way than gambling, and the scriptures lay that out. And we want to make sure we love our neighbors when it comes to this issue and guard ourselves, because many people are falling into that trap, and the scripture provides the tools to get out of it and to think well through it.
Thank you for listening to the Salem Baptist Church podcast. For more information about Salem, please visit our website at salem-bc.org.